In our last episode, we explored the final years of Wilhelm II's Germany and the tangled alliances that pulled Europe to the brink of war. But while Germany's fate would ultimately be decided on European battlefields, its leaders believed that an empire worthy of the name must stretch beyond Europe's shores. This belief, born of competition, prestige and fear of falling behind other powers, drove Germany into Africa's heart during the late 19th century. This is Germany's global gamble, and today we follow the story of how a newly unified Germany carved out an African empire and sowed the seeds of resentment, conflict and tragedy that would haunt it long after the Kaiser's dreams faded. This is Road to Destruction, the World Wars. When Otto von Bismarck oversaw German unification in 1871, he saw no need for overseas colonies. He considered them expensive distractions from Europe's balance of power. Yet by the early 1880s, Germany's industrial giants, Krupp, Siemens, and the Hamburg shipping companies, pressured Berlin to secure raw materials, export markets, and naval bases to match Britain and France. Moreover, nationalist groups like the Pan-German League began demanding Weltpolitik, a world policy that would assert Germany's place among the great colonial powers. Kaiser Wilhelm I was skeptical, but Chancellor Bismarck, always the tactician, realized that colonial adventures could rally German conservatives and divert attention from social tensions at home. The opening salvo of Germany's African ambitions came in 1884, when the merchant Adolf Lüderitz negotiated a treaty with local leaders in southwest Africa, present-day Namibia. Backed by Bismarck, the German flag was raised over Lüderitz Bay. This move surprised Britain and France, who saw it as a direct challenge in the ongoing scramble for Africa. Bismarck then hosted the Berlin Conference of 1884–85, a diplomatic gathering of European powers meant to partition Africa and avoid inter-European wars. Ironically, Bismarck had previously mocked colonialism, but at the conference he emerged as a master broker, securing German holdings while avoiding open conflict with rivals. By the end of the 1880s, Germany's African empire had taken shape with four main colonies: German Southwest Africa, to today's Namibia; German East Africa, covering modern Tanzania, Rwanda and Burundi; Togo, known as Togoland; and Cameroon, present-day Cameroon. These vast territories together spanned over 2.5 million square kilometers, instantly propelling Germany into the ranks of Europe's major colonial powers. Yet, unlike Britain or France, Germany arrived late to the colonial race. It had to scramble to establish authority, often deploying minimal resources and racing to define borders before rival powers could challenge its claims. Once territories were claimed, Germany established harsh, militarized administrations. Colonial governors, often former soldiers, ruled with an iron hand, backed by local levies and imported officers. The goal was simple: extract resources, rubber, ivory, cotton, and open new markets for German industry. Colonial companies like the Deutsche Ostafrikanische Gesellschaft, German East Africa Company, became private empires unto themselves, collecting taxes, building railways, and punishing resistance with brutal expeditions. Though rail and port infrastructure expanded, it primarily served European commerce, not local needs. The most notorious chapter of Germany's African venture came with the Herero and Nama genocide, 1904 to 1908, in southwest Africa. Frustrated by settlers stealing land and cattle, the Herero rose up. Governor Lothar von Trotha responded with a policy of extermination, forcing the Herero into the desert, poisoning waterholes, and establishing concentration camps. By the genocide's end, 80% of the Herero and 50% of the Nama populations were dead. The violence shocked parts of Europe, but in Berlin, most elites considered it a grim necessity for colonial control. In German East Africa, resistance was constant. culminating in the Maji Rebellion 1905 to 1907. Inspired by spiritual leaders promising protection against German bullets, tens of thousands of Africans attacked colonial outposts. German troops crushed the revolt with scorched earth tactics, leaving hundreds of thousands dead from violence and famine. Despite these horrors, German leaders crowed about their new empire. By 1910, they boasted of developing rail lines, building schools, and establishing trading posts across their African possessions. Colonial boosters argued that these territories demonstrated Germany's rising global standing, offering naval stations from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean and projecting imperial prestige abroad. Yet beneath this confident facade lay severe problems that plagued German colonial rule. Administrations were chronically underfunded and riddled with corruption, unable to enforce consistent policies or provide basic governance. Settler communities often clashed with Berlin, frustrated by the central government's shifting priorities and the lack of support for local development. Meanwhile, border disputes with Britain and France remained unresolved, creating simmering tensions that threatened to spark wider conflicts. Above all, local resentment against heavy-handed rule and brutal exploitation festered, priming many of these colonies for rebellion long before the outbreak of World War I. Germany's African empire also became a tool of Weltpolitik. Kaiser Wilhelm II used colonial crises to test other powers, most famously in the First Moroccan Crisis, 1905-06, and Second Moroccan Crisis, Agadir 1911, where he tried to drive wedges between France and Britain by championing Moroccan independence. Yet these gambits backfired. Rather than weakening the Entente, they drove Britain and France closer together, isolating Germany. Meanwhile, Germany's colonial presence deepened tensions with Belgium, Portugal and Italy, smaller powers also desperate for scraps of Africa. As Europe stumbled toward war in 1914, Germany's African empire looked impressive on maps, but delivered little strategic value. The colonies were remote, expensive and vulnerable, easy targets for Entente forces. By 1915, British, French, Belgian and South African troops had occupied or isolated most German African holdings. The grand imperial dream ended almost as quickly as it began. Germany's African adventure left behind scars still visible today, disrupted communities, altered economies, and memories of genocide that remain part of Africa's historical trauma. While Germany's colonial empire in Africa was short-lived, it foreshadowed the reckless ambitions of Europe's great powers, ambitions that would help drive the world toward the abyss of 1914. And Africa was only one part of Germany's global gamble. In our next episode, Germany in Asia, Dreams of an Eastern Empire, we turn to the Far East to explore how the Kaiser sought power on the shores of China and the islands of the Pacific. This is Road to Destruction, the World Wars.